Welcome back to The Big Show. It's the magic of the musicals, and it's always nice to meet a legend and a star, and we've got one for you today. Tony Sheldon, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Alex.
It's really nice to meet you. A bit off-putting, though. There you are with the false eyelashes and the makeup, and you look a bit peculiar.
I do. I look like a very beautiful woman. Far more beautiful than anyone could imagine.
Well, I wouldn't quite go that far, but you're very talented, and let me tell you, I've just sat through 2.5 hours of the campest old nonsense I've ever seen, and I loved every minute of it, and it was down to you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I mean, this is what Australia is exporting these days, camp old nonsense. We're sick of the dry as a bones and the good wine. It's camp old nonsense. I was doing the show for 2.5 years before I came over here, and it's a great honour because I was the only cast member that they travelled. So everybody else is from England or Scotland or Wales. And so, yes, my first go at the West End. It's a great thrill.
I've been very lucky to see most shows and talk to most of the big stars from them, and it seems to me you don't get to travel unless you're bringing something to the party that someone from that country can't deliver. And you really do. You bring such personality and warmth to it, and that's what I noticed about your role. We've got to kind of fall in love with you, haven't we?
It's true, because it's a hard call of transsexual as one of the leading roles in a musical. And I think it's also interesting too, that's why they probably didn't go with the star, because it could turn into a panto dame in the wrong hands. And I think if it had been Michael Crawford or somebody like that, you would sit there going, oh, that's Michael Crawford in a dress. But I think having somebody who is an unknown quantity to a degree, they're more prepared to suspend their disbelief and go with the story. But I was very lucky. I was in from the very first workshop of this show, and because I'm a writer and director myself, Simon Phillips, our director, gave me quite a large say in how things went. So if there was stuff that I felt was a bit ideologically unsound, I'd say, I'm sorry, I don't think this should be in the show. We're sending the wrong messages out. And so Simon really listened to me and still continues to do so. I'm very, very grateful for that.
Which is a great testimony to your talent and your CV, because let's face it, you've done everything, haven't you?
Pretty much. I started when I was 7 on television, and so you have to in Australia. It's a very small country, and there's not as many shows being done out there as there are over here. So you've got to keep yourself busy. You've got to pay the rent. So I have taught myself to be a writer, and I've written sitcoms, and I've written soap operas, and a lot of cabaret and review and stuff. And I also direct now as well.
You seem to be born to do this. It was just in your bones. I felt so comfortable watching you.
Well, the thing is, I used to go to see shows when I was a kid, and I still remember those shows, and I remember people walking through things and sitting there and going, hang on, you're having an easy day of this. And so it's that old thing. There is somebody out there who it might be their first time seeing a musical, or there might be somebody important out there, or for any reason, you've got to give 100% at every performance, I reckon.
So let's talk about the show then. It's called Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and it's described as the Queen of Fabulous, I think, outside the building. It's a camp show. It's a show where we recognise the music, which is nice, and it's different. Describe what we're going to get.
Well, I think you've just done it in a nutshell. For anybody who's seen the film, they know the story: two gay guys and a transsexual travelling across the Australian outback to do a gig in Alice Springs. The other two don't know that one of the gay guys is a father, and he's in fact off to see his son, who he hasn't seen since he was born. But what we don't have, of course, is the outback. That's the big stretch of the imagination with the stage show. So we've replaced it with all those wonderful songs that were in the film, but we've turned it into like a Ziegfeld Follies spectacular with the most outlandish costumes you've ever seen. I think you can see every penny of the million or several million pounds that have been invested in this show, and a lot of fun choreography. But underneath it all, there is a real heart to it. There's a lot of love as well.
And the dad in the show is Jason Donovan. What's it like working with him then?
Well, I'd never worked with Jason. Strangely enough, I'd worked with his dad. We did Sondheim's Company together, and his dad and my mum did Follies together. So, yes, the two dynasties met. He's lovely. I mean, he's an absolute wicked imp, and he loves being naughty on stage, so you've got to keep your guard up. But, yes, he's the sweetest man of all time. He really is. And the audience goes nuts when he comes out. I mean, as you said, today was a smallish house, but when the fans are in, and the minute he walks through that curtain, the scream that goes up is deafening.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because what depresses me about this business is most of the people leaving the audience won't know your name, and you're clearly the big star of it. Does that bother you that he's taking all your glory?
Look, my favourite story is that because I come down at the end without my wig, and they see that I'm actually a white-haired middle-aged gentleman. And my favourite story was two ladies in Australia who were leaving the theatre, and one of the ushers heard them say, "Well, what happened to Bernadette at the end?" And they said, "I don't know, she must have twisted her ankle or something." And he said, "Well, who was that man who came down the steps at the end?" And the other woman said, "Oh, that was the musical director. He always takes the last bow." So I figure if I did my job so good, so well, that they didn't actually know that I was a woman, I think that's fantastic. That's wonderful.
This is a tremendous show, and it's an uplifting show, and God, do we need it now.
We certainly do. And I was a bit nervous that we were opening in the middle of a great economic crisis, but we've been pretty much packed the entire time, and people are coming and seeing it 10 and 12 and 15 times. So obviously people, if they really, really want to see a show, they'll come, and fortunately they really, really want to see us.
Now, let's get back to you. You're the most important in this interview. Your career, you've done so many things. I know recently you did The Producers, which is one of my favourite shows ever. Tell me about that.
That was really interesting because we had the American production team who came out, and of course everything's got to be an exact replica of the way it was done on Broadway. So we felt really straitjacketed because there's a lot of very, very clever comedians in Australia, and we thought they don't know what we can do. We're not being given a chance here. So it was actually a very tough gig to do because you were being asked to reproduce somebody else's performance, and we all thought we can actually do better than the ones you're asking us to do. So it wasn't until long after they'd gone, and we actually had a break. We had a 2-month break in the middle of the show. I went off and did another play, and we came back to it, and the Americans weren't there, and we thought, right, and we actually took the reins, and the show became a better show because we tailored it to us. The audience responded to us, and the second year of the show was a much happier experience. But now, of course, if Priscilla goes on somewhere else, we've got the same thing. We can do the same thing to the Yanks. We go, no, this is how it's done. This is how we did it in Australia and London. Get our revenge.
And your part in The Producers was?
Roger Debris, of course, yes.
Well, that's not exactly his name, is it?
Well, yes, it is.
Well, wasn't it Roger Elizabeth Debris?
Oh, Roger Elizabeth Debris, of course, yes.
The point I'm making is you seem to find these peculiar roles.
Well, yes, I have spent the last 7 years in a dress, which is slightly, it's very cool. But yes, it's strange. I really hope people do have their memories about them when I finish my stint in this show, and they do remember that I have appeared in Shakespeare and, done Eliot and Private Lives and all those, Sondheim musicals, The Baker and Into the Woods. I do wear pants as well. I'm not just a principal boy.
And is it a drag doing a role like this?
Oh, look, it's fascinating because the challenge is playing a believable woman, which is a different thing to being a guy in a frock. And you can get away with a lot more being a guy in a frock, but the concentration involved in being a woman. Because if suddenly for just 1 second you think, hang on, I'm not walking properly, or my hands are in the wrong place or something, you just go out of the zone, as they say, and it takes a bit to get back in. So you've really just got to keep your wits about you and just know they have got to believe in you every single second of this show, or the storyline doesn't work because, a big bloke falls in love with me in the second half, and if the audience isn't with you, then the show falls. It's a real challenge.
A few things about the show. It made me feel quite inadequate sitting through 2.5 hours of all these Adonises on stage. There's not many fat, ugly blokes with ginger hair, are there?
I know. It's and the other thing is they've all got to be tall because they've got to play all those larger-than-life women, but they've also got to be believable as miners and blokes who from the outback. So it's a tough call to find people to do this show. They've all got to be above 6 foot and be believable blokes and believable beautiful women. Yes, it can be very intimidating for the audience, I would imagine. The women as well.
And let's talk about the wigs. How many have you got?
I've only got the one, actually. There's the one, and the other two are sort of attached to turbans for very quick changes. But I've struck gold with the wig over here because the wig in Australia made me look quite sort of matronly. It was more the Terence Stamp look in Australia, but here they've made me look very glamorous, and I'm very grateful for that because, you're very insecure being a not very good-looking middle-aged bloke who's suddenly being asked to, be a femme fatale. So I need all the help I can get.
And, of course, the frocks. There's many many of them.
There are many of them. I have 20 costume changes, I think, in the show. And the designers who did the film, they won the Academy Award for the film, except I think their budget was, £2.10 for the movie, and they made do with a staple gun and a bit of hot glue. Here they had an enormous amount of money to play with, and their imagination and their wit has run riot. So there's some spectacular clothes in the show. It's a lot of fun.
And then the phone rings and they say, do you fancy going to the Palace? Do you fancy going to London, to the West End? How do you feel?
I honestly didn't believe it was going to happen until I was on the plane. And because this has been dangled before me with the producers. They said, oh, yes, we'll take you to London. And I've done 2 other shows in the past 30 years where they said, of course, Edinburgh Festival, and it never happened. And I've never worked outside of Australia. And suddenly I found myself on the flight coming over to do the launch, and I sobbed. I was sitting by myself and I cried all the way because I thought it wasn't so much for me, it was for my mum who I'm 3rd generation, and my aunt is Helen Reddy, who went to America and won Grammy Awards, and she did Blood Brothers in the West End, and my mum worked over here in the 60s, and my dad was a dancer, and my grandparents were comics, but I think my mother really wanted this for me more than I did, and so it was like fulfilling the family destiny, really. And there's no end to where this journey could go. We don't know where Priscilla's going to go after this, and my involvement with it, I don't think is going to finish here. So it's extraordinary that this has happened at my time of life.
You've alluded to it already, obviously a tick in the box being in the West End, but Broadway's the one they all dream of because that's the place where we associate musical theatre with. Is it going to go there, do you think? And if it goes, would you like to go with it?
Well, yes, to both of those questions. I know the plan is to take the show over there. I think it has to be a major rework for it because it may be a global village, but the references that the English people get, like Neighbours and Kylie and stuff, that won't mean a thing over there. So we've got to find parallel references to the show. So it's going to be a major retool. I think the plan is to do a very, very long tour before it goes to New York. So it will possibly play other parts of America or Canada, and then eventually wind up in New York, I would think in 2011, in which case I will be the world's oldest transsexual. I will be on a walking frame.
And are you missing home at all?
Look, I'm not. My partner's over here with me, and my mum came over for opening night. Of course, I had to fly her over. That was absolutely essential.
Business class, I hope.
Oh, of course I did. Of course, I did the whole schmear. Now I spend the rest of the year saving up the money to pay it off. But, with this wonderful thing like the internet and all of that, I keep in touch with my mates down there. But no, I'm not. The short answer is no, I'm not missing home. It's all still too much of a new adventure. And I'm adoring being in London. It's just so thrilling for me. And hopping on buses and exploring and going, my one day off, I see 2 shows on a Sunday every week. Somebody asked me out to lunch. I said, I can come in August, like August 28th. That's my next free day. I'm doing the town, doing it up brown, as they say.
London's all right, but smiling is a sign of weakness, isn't it?
I'll stop smiling immediately.
Congratulations on being you. Seriously, this is a great show. We should say this ain't Mary Poppins.
No, it ain't. It's not really suitable for very young kids, probably like 14, 15 up. The language is a bit close to the knuckle.
And other parts of the anatomy.
Well, yes, there's a few shocks in there, but for everybody else, as long as you're not of the closed-minded persuasion, you can't help but love it, I think.
Tony Sheldon, thank you so much for being you. To see a legend in musical theatre is such a rare treat because so many people phone it in and just do it and it looks like anybody else, but there are a couple of people in this show and you were one of them who really stuck out. Congratulations on being you.
Thank you so much, Alex. I'm very flattered. Thank you.